Coming up, the New York Football Giants and the free agency frenzy. We break down how the Saquon Barkley negotiations broke down and also improving the offensive line, the Brian Burns trade of it all, and just the nature of trying to improve an NFL roster as the offseason unfolds. We dive in coming up next. Yes, my friends, it's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where you know that we are your hosts. Over here, Adam Armbrecht, over there, Andrew Mackwitz. We're healthy, we're wealthy, we're wise. We're talking New York Football Giants, Hard Knocks, Episode 3. Easily, I think, Andy, the most interesting of the episodes, just because it's free agency, negotiations, pivoting, and at a high level, it just felt like you were at least getting a look behind the curtain of how tense it can feel when you're trying to get deals done, you're waiting to get calls back, and all the while the league is also doing the same thing around you. So this was by far for me the most interesting and insightful episode we've seen to this point.
Yeah, I agree. I think episode 1, you kind of got the baseline of what you were going to see. This is not about the players; it's about the front
Peanut butter
office
sandwiches.
and the GM and the coach, primarily GM and the team that supports him. Episode 2 was a little bit of like, what are we going to do here? What's our plan? And then this episode clearly was the frenzy that happens. I don't know if I necessarily agree with like the poker chips and the playing poker and the whole thing, but like I do understand that they were trying to illustrate to maybe someone that isn't familiar with exactly how it works. Like it's a cause and effect, and there are chess pieces on a chessboard that you have to move effectively. And
Yeah.
every decision that you make impacts the next decision that you make. You can't get all the things you want in free agency. You can't do all the things that you hope to do. You can't solve all the problems that you have to solve. And so
Yeah.
I agree with you. I think this was the most fascinating episode, just in general, of seeing how a front office works during a critical and urgent time like this. What was your biggest theme or takeaway that you had from the episode in general?
I mean, I think at a high level that there was clearly coming into this off season, as you wouldn't be surprised, there was clearly an emphasis on wanting to fix the offensive line, on wanting to improve the defensive front. But I also think from an allocation of funds standpoint, there was a very clear, as you mentioned, cause and effect. If we do X, it means we can't do Y. If we make this decision, as we'll get into with the Brian Burns, it's like, then that's it. That's what you get. You get what you get and you don't get upset. And listen, there's far worse things to get than Brian Burns in terms of only adding one piece to the defensive side of the football. But the mechanics of how they got there, I would say that there philosophically may have been differing opinions inside of the New York Football Giants building. Joe Schoen is the GM, Brian Daboll is the head coach. I I like the process by which they got there. There are moments I think we'll discuss along the way where the Giants made decisions, or decisions were made for them, I should say. Some things were made for them, and then they were able to pivot off of that.
Yeah, I think that some of the decisions were made, to your point, by how other teams dictated or what the price was or whatever it may be. Adam, I walked away from this episode concerned,
Oh, good.
very concerned with how the Giants front office works. And maybe this is how it works everywhere. Maybe this is how every single team does business. But
Andy, do
Adam,
tell.
I walk away more concerned about I gave Joe Shane blind faith in everything that he had done up until this point. And
Yeah.
now peeling back getting a peek behind the curtain, peeling back the onion more and more, I get concerned with a whole host of things that were going on in that building. One of them, primarily, and we'll talk about the agenda of, yes, they want to address the offensive line. There's certain things that they wanted. They wanted to get an impact player for Shane Bowen.
Yeah.
Adam, the common theme that I got off this was, however they are evaluating the players that they want to get and how much it's going to cost to get said players was alarming. It was alarming because they missed on almost all of the players that they were looking at, and they had thresholds that they wanted to go to that they blew past because they missed exactly what the market value was going to be on some of these players, and that left them in compromising positions across the board. And so for me, I walked away at a high level being like, I am not as confident as I was before this episode aired about how our front office just handles all of this stuff in pressure situations.
All right, so let's start to walk our way through it here, and then we'll see if we agree or disagree on some of those inflection points when it comes to what do we think the market is going to command and what are we willing to do. Saquon Barkley will be a part of that discussion, obviously inside of it as well. But one of the things that was very clear here, if you wanted to say the Giants go into the offseason, now listen, they have some control of this narrative that they're putting out there through Hard Knocks, but there were three names getting mentioned when it came to offensive line. It was John Runyon Jr. That was the kind of the first one that Joe Schoen mentioned to Brian Dable in his office. Said, "You good with that?" And he goes, "Yep, like no problem there." Then Illuminor got mentioned as being their best offensive lineman. And if we bring him in, we're talking about adding, and this is one we'll get into a little bit deeper, our starting right guard or right tackle. So they labeled him as a starter and they labeled him on the right side of the line. We haven't seen that yet in limited OTAs this offseason. We've seen him on the left side. And then you also had Robert Hunt. So a pool of three, and it quickly ends up shrinking down to these two guys. Now, this arguably, I guess, would be where Andy would say the first point. As I just go to I want to make sure I got the numbers right here. The offer came in from the Jets when it came to Runyon, $9 million AAV, 2-year deal, $17 million guaranteed. Now, the Giants end up going a little bit more there, giving the third year. It's still the same guaranteed money, but it's $10 million per 3-year deal. And this comes as the first time when it's, hey, we want to get our guy, our cross stadium brothers are also angling for him. Are we willing to go to that extra year? Are you viewing this as the first instance where you're saying, well, we had to do more than we didn't realize what the market was commanding when it came to, say, Runyon and having to go the third year to secure him?
No, I listen. So there was competition for John Runyon. They knew that they needed to address the interior offensive line. They mentioned it a few times. They were thinking about, do we take a big swing with someone like Robert Hunt, or do we kind of piece it together with a couple of complementary pieces, knowing we have so many holes? So what they all play against each other. We talked about the chess pieces on the chessboard. I want
Sure.
to get to
Yeah.
the Robert Hunt thing in a second because that to me is important as well. But John Runyon Jr., it was an area of need. There was fierce competition for his services. They didn't end up guaranteeing more money than the Jets did. They just put on an extra year, which, what
Mhm.
I mean, what does that really matter to the Giants in the grand scheme? If you're not guaranteeing more money, you can cut him afterwards. So I'm not going to drill them for saying, here it is. If you want to give an extra $1 million to get your guy, fine.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that, knowing that we absolutely needed to walk away with at least one guard. They locked that spot in. I'm okay with that piece of it.
Okay, now quickly, because you want to get to the Robert Hunt, the Illuminor contract, I feel, is the same thing. Now they didn't want it; they didn't want it to go, so they end up putting it in where they get the void year. Effectively, it means nothing, right? The guaranteed money is the guaranteed money. You're not locked in, but that's what he wanted. It's a adjustment to what they wanted to do. You see the exchange inside the office. Joe Schoen saying, "Okay, and this gets it done. It's the second year. The money men all break it down how it's going to fold out." Are you comfortable with that one as well when it comes to Illuminor?
Well, I don't fully understand how they set themselves on hard limits. Like, these are the positions that we need to walk away from if it gets too expensive. And it's like, yeah, kind of just looked around the room and they're like, yeah, but if it's going to get them, let's just like break our rules. And I was
Yeah,
like,
see,
I
I
don't.
see. That's the part where I think I'm not sure. They make mention of we have our restrictions and what we're willing to go to or not go to. One of the funny little features of this episode is when they show the big board on the side, it's all blurred because you're not going to get the full facts or information about where they're at. Now, so using, even if you use the Runyon, we wanted him on a 2-year deal, but in order to get him away from the Jets, we had to go to the third year. Now, does that mean they broke their own parameters, or that was one of their thresholds that they were willing to go to? Likewise for Illuminor, we'd like to get him on a 1-year stopgap deal so that we know that we have him, or we can go the extra to the second year. Now, this is where I think it dovetails into the Robert Hunt of it all, because there was a key sentence that Joe Schoen had where he was saying, we've got Thomas, we've got JMS, we add in Runyon, and he threw out the idea of, and those are our guys for the next 3-4 years. So then when you get to the Illuminor of it, I think the splitting hairs and maybe saying like, well, where did we just go to? Again, ultimately the contract doesn't change this, but the idea is, were we adding in the other guy that's going to be 3-4 years with us, or did we add in a guy that we feel like might be a stopgap?
Well, so I read the situation completely different than maybe you did, and maybe it was because I was like, "What the heck is going on right now?"
Hmm.
First, the Giants said, "What was our walkaway number from Illuminor?" They looked around the room. They're like, "It was 6 million annually," and they're like, "What is he asking for now?" 7. Okay, well, our walkaway number was 6. Like, that was our hard and fast dead number. And now we're just going to give him an extra million and bump it up 15% because, like,
Well,
what
but yeah,
else
but
is
like
our
Shane mentions
option?
it though, like that's the market. Like, yeah, okay, like this is where we were at, and the market has shifted slightly. And by the way, like you can easily go back and say that's just because the cap went up. The cap went up by more than people expected, so your thresholds go up a little bit more. Now,
Sure,
whether or not you want to say, oh, we
But the
said the
Giants
hard
didn't
cap
do
was
that.
here. Like,
And if the Giants did do that and said 6 million is with the expanded cap
sure,
guard
sure.
number,
Yeah,
then you hear Joe Schoen saying, "Well, can we get him on a 3-year deal?" They actually wanted Illuminor longer to
right.
get
Would you
some
go
more
longer? Right.
predictability, and they're like,
Yeah,
"No," like
yeah, he
David said, he
wanted,
only
sorry.
wants a 2
He
because he
wanted
wants to
the
get back
optionality
out.
to get out and get back to market.
He wants
Yes,
to get
yes.
back to market
Yeah.
fast. So the Giants had to pay more, didn't get the extra year like they did with Runyon, which is why I'm more okay with the Runyon piece of it.
Right, right. Okay.
But I understand also how important Illuminor is to the Giants' plan because they had him ranked the highest because he does have the flexibility to play the right tackle and the
Yeah.
guard spot, which is why, like, if he is a priority free agent and he is the number one guy that you want, like paying an extra $1 million, I appreciate that. It felt like they got finessed where it's like, let's get him for 3. He doesn't want that. He wants to be out on the market. Offer him 6. I know that's our drop dead number, but he wants 7. And they're like, well, let's just give him what he wants because we don't have a backup plan at this point. To me, that's where I kind of was like, huh, like both times they had to pay more than what they even felt comfortable with.
And so I want to put a pin into the Robert Hunt of this all so we get into some other things. Then
Woo!
we'll round out on what'll be like the missed guys, I think, the guys that were not pursued by the Giants and what maybe it meant relative to how they chose to go about this, right?
So I don't have to be long winded with this because
Okay.
I want to make sure that we clear off the offensive line. There's a ton of stuff to go with. Where I really get upset is we both highlighted, and I was banging on the table for Robert Hunt. He was my guy from day one. You were totally in when
Yep.
we talked about his numbers and his stats and his age and
Yep.
everything else. And when you looked at those stats, the Giants said he's on our board for 13 to 15 million dollars. And then all of a sudden they're like, well, because John Runyon Jr. costs an extra $1 million, we're out of the Robert Hunt sweepstakes. I'm like, no, 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 no. You don't get to do that and like misremember how history went. They were egregiously off in what Robert Hunt's value was on the free agent market. Robert Hunt signed for a 5-year, $100 million deal. So when they're prioritizing their free agents, they were 20 to 30% off of what Robert Hunt was going to get as one of the top guards in free agency. How do you miss so badly on your top premier guy and then say, well, because we gave this guy an extra $1 million, we weren't in the sweepstakes? No, you guys completely misread the market, and he was never going to be a Giant if that's what your valuation was.
That's okay, but okay. My quick pushback on that is that's what his market value was listed at. It wasn't what the Giants listed him at. That was on Spot Track. It was on
No,
all
no,
of
no,
the
no,
outlets.
no.
Yes,
The
it was.
Giants did their own. The Giants did their own research of what their walkaway number was and what their positional value
No,
was.
that's fine.
For
That's fine. But
all
I'm
of these
saying
players.
his value, Robert Hunt's market value, was listed in that range of 13 to 15 million. Again, then the salary cap came out over the course of this summer. And when that number spiked, then everything ratcheted up. Now, whether or not the way, and I'm not, by the way, this isn't like in defense of the New York Football Giants, but whether or not the Giants then from that point forward made the appropriate adjustment to say, like, hey, if we're going to pursue him, it's going to be closer to 20 than it is to 15. That's what the agenda is here. So whether or not they then, from a narrative standpoint, say, hey, we spent a little extra on John Runyon, so we're not going to have the extra million here or there to spend on something else. Like I agree on it's bad framing as to why you couldn't go pursue him, but it's not, it's inaccurate to say the Giants misgauged the market for him. That's what it was perceived to be pre-salary cap explosion. Then it changed. And in all honesty, while they may have thrown him in there, maybe they should have just not put that name
Yeah,
down on
that's
the
my
deck.
point. It's like however we want to dice and splice how they got to the 13 to 15 million dollar number. That was not a realistic number for Robert Hunt with the cap going up and the interest in the guard spot.
Understood.
So
Understood.
the fact that they completely missed that and they're like, well, we didn't go after the best guard on the market because we gave an extra $1 million to John Runyon Jr. I'm like, no, you misread how the market and the cap would go up and what Robert Hunt's value was. He was never going to
Okay.
be in play for you. So like to
All right,
me,
that's fair. All right, you can. Yeah, that's it's fine. It's fine to frame it that way. Let's get into some other stuff here. I don't disagree that they missed the mark on what the price point was going to be. I just don't. I did not read that as being as concerning relative to what they were trying to accomplish. They knew they needed to add in a few pieces. And regardless, when you look at the numbers for Illuminor and you look at the numbers for Runyon, it would have been basically impossible for them to add 2 offensive linemen if one of them was going to be Robert Hunt at that price point. But to be fair, Andy is bringing up some interesting things here coming out of this episode where there's a lot of insight, but certainly, and this is something that I did want to touch on, there is versions of this where the Giants were slowly navigated into secondary options as opposed to their primary. Let's talk about the Saquon Barkley of it all, the interesting timeline around one Devin Singletary joining this team, and a soft in the wind departure for one Xavier McKinney. We'll get into that here in just one moment. All right, this is a Seismic One Giant podcast. We are well into the midpoint of our episode, and we've only touched on the offensive line. I knew this was going to be the case because this was a very good episode from Hard Knocks and free agency as well. So the Saquon Barkley of it, I feel like I don't want to get too in the weeds on this because it has been discussed every single episode. It's been discussed all throughout the offseason. My big thing from a high level is that if you are on either side of the ledger when it comes to Saquon Barkley, here's the way I absorbed it, and Andy will tell me why I'm probably wrong. John Mara came in, and I think this is fine. I think John Mara looks fine. I think he's coming across fine in all of this. Basically, he pokes his head in. He says, hey, like, this is what I'd like. This would really hurt. These are things that I'm hoping for. But seemingly, he then leaves, and he goes about his day, and when he comes back, the results are the results, including when the final contract came in for Saquon Barkley. I thought it was notable that he basically came in and did not seem to be irritated by the fact that the numbers were right in the range of what the Giants could have matched. And this is where I think there is a gap in what people took away from that episode versus what happened. The final conversation where Joe Schoen says, so if I give him 12 and a half, that means that he'll be back as a Giant. You did not hear, there's 2 key words. If I offered this, it was not, I'm going to offer this. And you did not hear what the agent said back. And I'm pretty sure what the agent said back was, F off, we're not coming back to the Giants. We're leveraging you to get something else. Whether he said it out loud or in his own head, my entire read of this, as I said from the beginning, was Joe Schoen wanted to move on. Now, Brown said, hey, yeah, we'd throw money at him. There were people in the building that would have brought Saquon back for sure. But Joe Schoen did not want to bring him back, understanding the restrictions they had from the amount of money they could spend this offseason. And Saquon Barkley didn't want to be here anymore. He wanted to get paid. And I think if you go back to the previous episode and you remember Saquon saying, I already told you where I want to be at. My belief is the only way that Saquon was going to be a Giant is if they gave him the, hey, our team has sucked forever. You've absolutely gotten beaten up and dragged through it over the start of your career. Here is the exorbitant contract. You'll get paid while our team suffers. And I think the Daniel Jones contract really hurt the relationship between Saquon Barkley and the Giants because he has put real success on tape, whereas Daniel Jones, for a million different reasons, is a far more questionable figure to be getting $40 million.
Yeah. So I have a
Thank you and good night.
So I actually think most of what you said is correct. I generally agree with you on a lot of this.
Perfect.
And I'm not going to get into some of the semantics of who said what or how things kind of went down. Here's what I know, and here's what I think I know, and I would like you to tell me where I'm wrong on this.
Perfect.
I think. I know that in that conversation, the agent for Saquon Barkley said 3 for $12.5 million a year, $25 million guaranteed. And Joe said, okay, so like if I offer that, it's a done deal. We're getting it done. And you heard him even talk to John Mara on the phone. He's like, he was kind of wishy-washy. He said, well, we still have to see what happens.
Can I real quick
Yeah.
say that like there was something in there where I was like, well, the way that the agent communicated to Joe Schoen, like a game of telephone, and then the way he relayed that to John Mara, I think, again, because I don't believe Joe Schoen wanted Saquon Barkley back, I think he tried to, within reason, lay on the, I don't know, it's a little tricky there, Johnny. I don't know if he's going to want to play ball because he did not want to get caught in that mix.
I agree. I do think in that moment, if he did offer that offer,
yeah,
I do think that there is a good chance that Saquon Barkley is still a New York Giant. I still do, even with all the scar tissue because I do believe that that's just the deal that he wanted. So that's the first thing. The second piece of it is obviously when he gets the bigger offer from Philadelphia, and he gets 13.5 million, and he immediately was like, yeah, we're out. We're not even in the same stratosphere. I
Yeah.
was going to have to be bullied by the owner and my assistant GM in order to give this other 3-year deal that you even said that you didn't want, right?
Right.
So like there was that piece of it. But here's the thing
Which does
again.
conflict then with being willing to go an extra million on another player on the offensive line, but not necessarily that position. So now Andy, he's building a spider web here.
Yes. So now you can see how it's like kind of willy-nilly, and like the evaluation kind of was already clouded by Joe Schoen's perceptions of how he wanted to build the team, not necessarily the numbers that everyone had put out there. So Adam, here's what I think I know. I think that I know if any of the other 31 GMs in the NFL were our GM, Saquon Barkley is still a New York Giant today. I firmly in my heart
Amazing.
of hearts believe that, because if you look at a few things, one, the front office was like, he's our most popular player. We love him. He wants to be here. He's a pillar in the community. He's amazing. Like everyone loves this guy. Then you look when he becomes a free agent, the Chicago Bears are bidding up for his services. The Houston Texans are throwing him a bigger offer than the Philadelphia Eagles are. The Philadelphia Eagles are throwing him an offer that he cannot refuse. His interest around the league at that high free agent number was multiple teams. It wasn't
But
one
that's
team.
so 100% the interest for him, but that's a very different thing. I don't think you can sit here and say any other GM is the GM for the Giants and he's still a Giant. You're taking the Houston Texans, who have spiked and have their franchise quarterback and are on a high right now and buzzing towards trying to win a division. Yeah, we want to go at a guy like Saquon Barkley. Philadelphia Eagles, our window is now. We want to win. This guy's an elite piece. The Chicago Bears, we're going to be drafting our star QB in the draft here. We want to have a player behind him in the backfield that can be electric and help complement our wide receivers. You're talking about all of these teams that are at far different places in their franchise trajectory than the New York Football Giants are right now. The Giants are a mess. They need to fix their offensive line. They need to add defensive help. They don't know what the story is with the quarterback. Now, if you're telling me that all GMs in the situation of, hey, we're sitting here at 12.5 AAV and it's going to take 13.5 to keep him here, do I think many GMs would have said, okay, we'll go the extra million because of all these extra things that he means to us? Potentially, like 100% potentially. But I can easily sit here then, and then I can tell you the story about how you didn't sign both offensive linemen, or you didn't end up being able to trade for and sign Brian Burns. Whether or not every single dollar checks out here, it shifts. And the one thing we take away from these hard knocks is, boy, move by move, player by player, dollar by dollar, you have to shift and reset where your windows are to go pursue players.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. If the dollars impact the dollars, what I'm saying at a high level, and I think you understand what I'm saying when I say all 31 other GMs.
Yeah. Like,
One, this kind of reflects on the fact that Joe Schoen, I feel, misread the market on what Saquon Barkley was going to be, when Brandon Brown and others are saying he could get 13 million, and Joe Schoen's like, who's going to pay that? Who's going to pay that? And they're like, I don't know, Philadelphia, maybe Houston. Like the team seemed pretty tapped in with like who and how much Saquon could get. The other piece of it is, I can't remember a scenario where a top 5 player at his position, a Pro Bowler, explosive all-pro guy that is well liked by the fan base, well liked by ownership, goes to the team and says, just give me whatever the market rate is for the top 5 player at my position, and I'm here. And the team says no to him. That's what, whether it's right or wrong, I have never seen a situation where a top 5 quarterback's like, yeah, just give me like whatever the market value is for a top 5 for the position. And the team's like, you know what, we're going to go in a different direction. And so
yeah.
for me, it's just surprising that like all of these things are lining up. He's not even asking to break Christian McCaffrey's number. He's not looking to reset the market. And we still walked away from him, whether good or bad. It's unprecedented in the NFL for that to happen.
And if you want to put it into the category of where is the running back market going to be, talking about 7 million, those numbers got thrown out, I think, in episode 1 of Hard Knocks. Where's that market going to go? Now, again, I wonder what insight that leads to here. Somebody noted like Adam Schefter was like, it's a disaster for the Giants. It's going to haunt them all season long, like inviting them in behind the scenes. I don't really read it that way. I think what is fascinating about it is, I wonder if you mentioned like all 31 other GMs, if you put cameras in all 31 other franchises,
Yes.
how strikingly similar it may or may not look of like, we think it's this, turned out to be that. We want this guy. We can't get him. I wonder if like that's a part of it. So maybe my quote, pushback to the idea of your concern is like, I think it's probably a lot more similar than dissimilar. It's not like there's guys around the league going like, ha 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 ha, we got you again. It's more like we're all kind of flying by the seat of our pants. And we're gonna get, and we'll know, and we'll talk about that when we talk about the Brian Burns negotiations and getting that deal done as well, right?
Yeah, to your point, and this is why I have that question at the front. Like, I walk away less confident. Maybe I would have walked away less confident across any GM that was in there because of how frantic and frenetic and like things change, or you miss on this number or that number. But the
Yeah.
Giants are the only ones doing this. And my question is, am I concerned about how the Giants make their sausage, or am I more concerned about how sausage is just made in general? Right? Like that to me might be the question that you ask yourself across the landscape. But to me, I walked away from the O-line piece being like, they did miss. They went above the numbers that they wanted to get their guys. That was a little bit of a challenge. And with the Saquon Barkley piece, I kind of looked at it and said, Joe Schoen misread the market of whatever it was going to be. Even if he didn't want to go there, he didn't think that anyone was going to offer that. He missed the market again on Saquon Barkley, on a guy who wanted to be here, according to him.
Let's talk about the QB room. Let's talk about Brian Burns. Let's talk about sausage, all coming up here as we continue a deep dive OGP. All right, as we roll along here, remind you today's episode is brought to you by Pietential, Pietential. That spells Pietential. It is an online free assessment tool for individual users. It sets a baseline for your well-being, gives you tools to improve over time, and also tracks your progress. Joe Schoen needs this. He needs to be making sure that he is staying on an even keel here as he worked his way through this offseason, into training camp, into the regular season, and what could be a hot seat year for the GM in New York. Get over to Pietential today and check it out. So, one, I think the sausage analogy is good because you're like, yeah, generally speaking, there's a lot of stuff that goes into sausage depending on what grade you're getting. And that, yeah, maybe I don't want to know, right? I don't want to know what's in the hot dog. I just want to get that dirty water dog on the side of a New York street and say, delicious. Don't need to tell me how it got made. Here, okay, the one thing I'm going to say is, before we get into the Drew Lock and the Tyrod Taylor of it all, which I actually, I'm going to take a small victory lap when it comes to that here in a moment, is when we talk about, so you said, oh, they missed on the offensive line. They didn't miss. They got two out of this. They had three guys on their board to target. They got two of them, and they paid a little bit more to get them. Missing them would have been they got outbid for them, and they didn't land them. They landed two players that they believed could improve their team. Now, we'll have another episode, and I want to do it, where we say, here's the alternate version of this offseason and how they allocated their money. That's fascinating. But they did hit on that. And again, I'm going to drill down on this for the umpteenth time here for everyone. Joe Schoen didn't want Saquon Barkley back. So they did not, yes, market, blah, blah, blah. I am telling you 1,000%. I even think that when you talk about, oh, he said maybe 7-ish million or 9, what's the market going to be like for running backs this offseason? Who's going to pay him that? I think that's in the Hard Knocks specifically to have everyone get the sense that Joe Schoen is thinking, I'll pay about 7 to 9 million for you. I'm not going to pay 10. I'm not going to pay, okay, well, could we be in there at 12 and a half? Maybe we could, maybe we couldn't. He did not want. He was hoping that he could avoid having Saquon Barkley back. And how do I know it? Because ahead of the final tipping point with Saquon Barkley, he said in his office to Brian Dable, hey, if we miss out on Saquon, if we can't bring him back, you're good with Motor? Immediate yes from Brian Dable. Yep. He goes, you're good. Yeah, you're good with Motor, right? Yep. They were ready and waiting to bring in Devin Singletary to be the stopgap running back for them over the next couple of seasons. They were not concerned about losing Saquon Barkley, and it was evident in that move. Now, I want to get to the quarterback discussion here where they did want something and it didn't work out, but my soliloquy, I give you a moment.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. They did not want Saquon Barkley back. I actually think some of this was pageantry for the cameras to be able to like, no, please don't go, Saquon. Exactly. Whatever you do, don't do it. Oh my gosh, it's millions of dollars more than what we allocate. Like we right. couldn't possibly have done that. So I guess we have to move on to the guy that we already like have on a plane on the way up here in Devin Singletary. Like it felt like they always wanted Motor. They were not going to go. They were, I think, and this is the last thing I'll say on the running back room. Yeah. I think if the market didn't materialize the way it did for Saquon Barkley, and they could have gotten him on a 3-year, $10 million deal,
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
do think Saquon Barkley ends up being a Giant. The
Yeah.
fact that market value was 13 and a half, maybe 13 to 14 million dollars, they were never going to be in that
Right.
position. So I think they kind of knew that. Joe Schoen kind of deep down knew that, and they had already made the contingency plan for Devin Singletary. Motor was on their radar, knowing that they had familiarity with him already in Buffalo. He was always going to be the alternative. It was the reason why I pointed him out from the onset of like,
Yeah,
they
yeah.
have the familiarity with him. He's a guy that stays healthy. He gets 4.3 yards a carry. Like, he is the quintessential guy that they will pick if they go in a different direction. And I think we kind of knew that was the case.
Two things. One, you can go back to, I think, the first episode, maybe it was the second episode, when Joe Schoen says, hey, man, all the data tells you that at a certain age, running backs fall off a cliff. Go look at Devin Singletary's age. A little bit concerning that if you're bucking your own trend there. The second one was, no one noticed this. In Joe Schoen's office, there's a plant in the corner, and Devin Singletary was just standing behind it. He was just standing behind the plant. There was some leaves in front of his face, and then it was oh my God, guys, you think I should come for a visit?
Yo, can we tell them yet? Can we tell them that we had this agreement like 6 months ago?
Climbs out from a couch cushion. Now the other thing here is the QB room. And my insistence that while Tyrod Taylor is not the perfect quarterback, he is a valued quarterback in the league, because as a backup, he is considered to be one of the best options on the market. And the Giants in this episode said, and then we'll bring Tyrod back. We're looking to get that done. We're hoping to get that done. Looks like it's going to be a good deal here. I do wonder a little bit, all things being equal, if the Giants walk in and go, I see the Jets are looking at John Runyon Jr. Thump, there's a few extra million. We take him from you. And then when the Jets find themselves needing to get a backup quarterback, they go, all right, what's it going to take to get you over here? And that number ended up being too high for the Giants. Again, Andy would say this is misgauging the market another time here for the Giants. But I think the other thing you're learning is that, like, there's always a team that's willing to go that little extra bit to get a guy that they think that they want. The Giants then pivot to Drew Lock, who's in. My other guy, Gardner Minshew. They had him on the list there, now 10 to 20 million, so that didn't work out. They end up going with Drew Lock. They end up paying him $1 million over what their number they thought was at $4 million, but you're competing potentially with Seattle, who wanted to bring him back as well, at least based on what we heard.
Yeah, and it's good to see how that all played out, because I said, wow, they went and Drew Lock and they gave him a decent amount of money. You could see what happened with Tyrod Taylor. I honestly, and this is just me speculating with no inside knowledge or information whatsoever, I think if the offers were identical between the Giants and the Jets, I think Tyrod Taylor still goes to the Jets, given the given the fact that, like, when Tyrod was healthy, they were like, Tyrod, sit down, we're going to play Tommy DeVito over you. Like, if that was me as an athlete, I would have been like, why am I going back to that? You're going to replace me with a guy that was an undrafted free agent.
Right.
On top of that, it feels like the Jets are ready made. It feels like Aaron Rodgers has injury risks. It feels like Tyrod would be set up for a better situation, and he got more money from the Jets. So, like, for me, it makes a ton of sense for Tyrod Taylor to go to the Jets far away.
100%. And what I liked about, actually, one thing I'll put in Joe Schoen's corner was, the pitch to Drew Lock is the guys that have come here and backed up and going back to Buffalo and Trubisky. And then Tyrod Taylor, he goes, look, and this is right after Tyrod Taylor gets signed to the Jets. He goes, look, you come, you play backup for us, you get paid. Like, and that can matter. You think Daniel Jones and the injuries, you'll have a chance. If you can flash here, then fast forward another year later, there will be opportunities around the league, and maybe it pans out for you. Obviously, Drew Lock probably looking at it from both angles. Hey, maybe I get paid again down the line, or maybe I think that Daniel Jones is going to be a problem and I could carve out a real opportunity right here in New York for myself.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. The Drew Lock signing is fine. At first, I was kind of like, they spent more money than I wanted. The Giants ended up saying that they spent more money than they wanted. So, I think we were all in agreement there. The one last footnote on the quarterback position, Joe Flacco's name was thrown around as a guy. And, like,
I'll be honest with you, I didn't love that.
but he showed that, like, he can still fling the ball. He's got a rocket arm. If you wanted a guy that could mix it up and throw the ball down the field, Joe Flacco is that guy. The problem is, we don't know what this offensive line is going to be, and he's a statue. He literally is a statue. He would get murdered behind this offensive line. So, like, they need someone that can at least have a little bit of mobility. It wasn't going to be a good fit with the Giants, even though that it did intrigue me, because he does possess the ability to get the ball downfield to Neighbors and Hyatt and others.
Oh, of course. Yeah, but that was it wasn't about Joe Flacco. He's old and whatever. It's that he's not mobile. Okay, Gardner Minshew going to be too expensive. He has a little bit of mobility. Not, he's not the elite athletes of the league, but he can run a little bit. It's what they said about Drew Lock. He said 26, maybe 27. He can move a little bit, so we can like all the attributes that you associate with like a quarterback that makes sense inside of the Brian Daboll system. So when they're like, got Joe Flacco out there, was that just like yeah, you got Joe Flacco out there. Let's just throw his name out there because he's old and he's been around and what a comeback story he had. So that was just a little odd footnote there. Then, and to this point now, we're talking about 2 offensive linemen. We're talking about a running back that they gloss over that completely. Like, yeah, great, we signed him. It's all good. And then you also talk about getting your quarterback every single time, an extra million here, an extra million there. So it does start to add up. Before we do get to the Brian Burns of it, here's the other side. It's one guy named Xavier McKinney, who they don't talk about at all. I thought at some point it would get brought up, but the only time it gets brought up is when they're like, $17 million a year. Whew, that makes him, goes to the list, the second highest paid safety in the league. It was very much hey, we knew that market was going to be something. We had no appetite for it. And probably early going in the offseason, when we turned to the Brian Burns of it all, it was like, and if we think we can do this thing, there's just no world that we can even bother having discussions about a guy that's going to make $15 to $20 million. We're going to need every penny that we can get here. So that was just a interesting one for his age, position, all that good stuff. And the conversations with Shane Bowen saying like, and if we pivot to Brian Burns, like that's what you get. That's it. You get him. And then we do the draft, but like, you don't get anything else, buddy. No other toys.
So this is another area, and I'm not going to dwell on this too long because the Burns part is much more interesting.
Yeah.
Adam, this is another one where I am fully convinced that the reason that we didn't see Xavier McKinney at all in all of this is because the Giants front office completely misread his market and his situation again.
A lot of clips on the cutting room floor of like, we think 10 to 12, maybe we can get the job done.
Bingo. Imagine they're like, you know what? We offered Xavier 12 and he just won't take it. I wonder why. Like, what does he think he's going to get? Does he think he's going to get 14 million on the open market? Ha 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 ha. Bang. $17 million a year from the Green Bay Packers. I honestly believe this was another one where the Giants completely misread the market, misread the situation. And because the Giants like have editing rights over like negotiations and tactical things, you heard nothing about Xavier McKinney. Why on earth would they spend so much time with Saquon Barkley and not even have a single conversation with Xavier McKinney's agent? What we're prepared to offer him? What is the offer? Hey, Xavier, just go out there. If you want to be a Giant, test the market, find out what the market number is and come back to us. And if we can match it, that'd be great. You didn't hear a single thing about it. And Adam, when you don't hear anything about it, the only stuff that you, as you mentioned before, the only thing that they probably talked about would have painted the Giants in a bad light because they were way off on his value. This is another point. Whether or not you wanted to sign him, fine. Shane Bowen in his system doesn't care about the safety position as much as, say, a Wink Martindale or others. Totally fine to pivot to Brian Burns. It's the fact that you don't even hear anything about it that makes me suspect they weren't even going to be close if they wanted to get Xavier McKinney back. To me, that's a complete misread again. And that's the kind of theme that I have in all of this is kind of misreading.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if it's a good or bad thread to pull on. I tend to lean more towards the Giants are bad at like the narrative building that they maybe wanted to accomplish over the course of these hard knocks, as opposed to whether or not they had a real sense of it. Like, again, in their minds, we're going to throw out the low number because we don't want to pay Saquon Barkley. But then when you get to the back end of it, you're like, you thought you were going to get him for like half the cost? Like you thought you were going to get him for like, for 10 to 12 million less on the contract? Boy, that's really far off. So you maybe are trying to present something, and then in doing so, you actually make yourself look worse in another light. Now maybe I'm glossing it, right? Maybe I'm trying to make it look too pretty. The interesting part I will say, though, is if we want to go down that road, is the Brian Burns. Now, again, remember, Brian Burns is awesome. We're happy to have him. The contract is great. Could have been Christian Wilkins. They go this way. Amazing. Now, you go back and you think about, oh, okay, 2 1s. Yeah, I'd love to do it. 1 and something. Well, now you're getting there. Okay, let's talk. Now, originally, though, an offer gets thrown out. I found this interesting. The initial offer that got thrown out was the idea of saying the 47th 2024 draft pick and a 2025 draft pick. That's like floated. Then it ends up settling on 39 and 140 plus the higher of the 2 in 2025 fifth round picks. And the Giants get Brian Burns and they also get 165. I found it interesting because in all of these previews leading up to it, it comes a thing where you're like, come on, we're going to be working together, buddy. We're making deals all the time. Don't squeeze me for the 7th. Let's go back to what we originally said. I do just find it interesting that like what you originally said or what you actually got to here. It's like, oh, well, but you wanted to do a 47 and a future pick. Now I don't know what that future 25 pick was. That could have been a lot higher. Could have been a third. Could have been, whatever. But I was like, oh, and then it turned out to be the 39th, and it turned out to be 140, and it turned out to be the higher of the pick in next year's draft, and all those things. Like, okay, like you did get a lot out of that, and that's fine. The Giants got an excellent player. He's going to make everyone's life easier. We all get that. But if I want to go down Andy's road here, I would say, like, are we 100% sure that what was the market saying? Who else was offering things for Brian Burns, knowing the big contract was coming? In the end, it all works out, but maybe it's just another interesting footnote here around how they ended up acquiring him ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about how there's like an alternate universe on what could have happened. Keep in mind that the Carolina Panthers ended up being the ones to sign Robert Hunt, and so the fact that they spent the money on it while shipping Brian Burns out, and
Sure.
the Giants had to wait quite a while for it. Like, while the Giants are painted in a good light, because Dan Morgan jokingly said 2 number ones at the beginning, like, I don't know, he had Joe Schoen really antsy, just sitting by his phone while he signs Robert Hunt. And Joe Schoen doesn't know if he has the money to sign these players yet because he knows he has to give Brian Burns a contract. Like, there's a little bit of finessing going on all over the place. And,
Sure.
so for me, that was a little bit of a challenge. Clearly, Joe Schoen wanted Brian Burns from the start. And everyone was like, yeah, he's a good player, Joe. Like, we like him. Like, we're in. But it felt like as out on Saquon Barkley as Joe Schoen was, and everyone else was like, no, he's going to get money. Like, we still want him here. I felt like Joe Schoen was more in on Brian Burns than everyone else was in terms of what they were looking for. And so for me, like, he ultimately had
Do a
calls.
good job, by the way, of illustrating. They said, Dable asked, like, where's his sack totals at? And they're like higher than everyone else in his draft class over the last 5 years, 46 sacks, durable. We think he's still ascending. So, like, the assessment and evaluation of Brian Burns making this deal, everybody was in behind it. But to your point, like, but this goes back to like one of our first episodes talking about the Hard Knocks, where I was like, remember we had that debate where you said, oh, well, it's not just Joe Schoen, it's everybody's opinion. Well, the further we get down this, the more that I think it is what I said.
Yeah.
I think that Joe Schoen had his agenda. Hey, everybody, come talk to me, baby. Yeah, we're all doing a great job together. Deep down in his heart of hearts, he knew what he wanted to do this offseason, and with Brian Dable in mind as well, but he was going to get his agenda done.
Well, Adam, at the end of the day,
yeah, we're probably there.
I think we're there after such a healthy, spirited debate on all this. At the end of the day, I'm going to tease us into our next episode of the alternate universe of what could have been, Adam.
Yeah.
So the reason why I also think about all this, and I'm like, man, I don't feel as good as I did before I saw the episode. I mentioned all the misreading of the market, at least in my thought process on this. But Adam, we signed Brian Burns. We trade a second and a fifth with a little bit of a swap. We pay him almost $29 million a year to be our cornerstone guy. There is an alternative universe that if I painted to you and I said, what if instead of doing that, we signed Bryce Huff, who signed a 3-year, average $17 million deal, had 10 sacks last year.
Apple of my eye this offseason.
One of Adam's favorite guys. What if you needed to outbid the Philadelphia Eagles to get him and offered him 18 or 19 million and you overpaid there? You'd still have $10 million and a second round pick. What if that $10 million could have turned John Runyon Jr. into Robert Hunt? What if that $10 million could have changed Motor Singletary into Saquon Barkley and you have Huff, Saquon Barkley, and you still retain that second round pick to, I don't know, go get a cornerback in the NFL draft. So, Adam, there's an alternate universe where you could have Bryce Huff, Saquon Barkley, and a second round pick as opposed to Brian Burns and Devin Singletary. Only time is going to be able to tell us which one's the right one. But you kind of look at it and you think, man, there's a lot of ways the Giants could have gone. Was this the right way to construct the roster? I kind of walked away with more questions than answers after this episode.
And listen, we'll do that what if, and I won't include Saquon Barkley in it because that I think is far more interesting. You keep the money from Saquon Barkley, you still sign Motor, and how else do you go about fixing this team, still get the offensive line set, still get the defense help, all of those things while retaining, as Andy mentioned, your draft capital as well. So that's fascinating. And yes, we know the tease. I don't know if we'll talk about it before or not, But it wasn't just Drake May that the New York Football Giants were willing to trade up for. They were willing to trade up for anybody. They wanted the quarterback. Brian Daboll wanted a quarterback. Joe Schoen wanted a quarterback. No one is shocked by their interest in the QB market, but it certainly does further that cloud that hangs very large over Daniel Jones' head when you walk into a season where everyone seems to agree, boy, we really wish it was somebody else under center. That being the case, my friends, my God, what a journey. We didn't think that Hard Knocks was going to be that entertaining. This third episode certainly was, gave us a ton to talk about, a seismic episode, and you need to check it out. Be over on YouTube for our latest episodes. Get over on your podcast feed as well. Kicking off all throughout this offseason. The rookies reported, so we have a lot of things we're going to talk about throughout the rest of this week as well. Some injury updates only in classic offseason fashion that a tight end ends up on the unable to perform list, but we'll get into all of that as we continue at AMAC214, at Adam Armbrecht over on X, and at One Giant Podcast. My goodness. Until the next time, until the best times. As Andrew Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand that people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.